Hey everybody, welcome to Why Israel. This is our post-event interview with Clive and Jane. In the last episode, we were talking a little bit about having a kingdom meta-narrative, a wider context to understand things in order for church leaders to still be passionate about the church, but within the right framework of the way God is working through Israel. So now we're going to be talking about the book of Romans. This is something I know that really excites you, Clive. It does me as well. Obviously, Romans 11 is where we get that great passage of all Israel being saved. But go ahead and unpack for us how the book of Romans is a key to understanding God's heart for Israel.
Yeah, I think Romans is really, really important. Paul the Apostle speaks right into the heart of the Roman Empire, into Rome. There was a tension that was going on between the Gentile believers and the Jewish believers. Now, obviously, the gospel came to Rome through the Jewish believers. And as people being born again, as the Gentile community or Romans in Rome were getting born again, you can see Romans were dominating the world. They were ruling the world. So they had a mindset that we're in charge, that we dominate, we rule. What Paul realizes, I need to speak into this and help to give understanding. So he writes the book of Romans, and what he does, he addresses this issue and this tension. And the first 8 chapters of Romans, what he does is he explains the gospel. He explains the bigger picture. He explains that there was God's wrath and there's the need for salvation. He explains that the law in and of itself does not enable salvation to happen. He shows that salvation is by faith. Then he unpacks the gospel itself in those 8 chapters, showing that whether you're a Jew or whether you're a Gentile, it's only by faith that you can be saved. So he kind of creates a level playing field, and he pierces this tension of some of the Gentile Roman believers saying that, well, the gospel's now come to us. We're now going to wrap around our Roman thinking and culture around that. And therefore, what the Jewish people are bringing, some of their culture, is not relevant anymore because this is Rome. And what we then discover is he unpacks the gospel. It's by faith. It's not to do with your culture or your law or any of your own efforts. It's to do with what Jesus has done by grace and who you are now in Christ. He then goes into chapters 9, 10 and 11. Now these are really, really important, and often what happens is we teach Romans 1 to 8 as the gospel. We often leave out 9, 10 and 11 because we don't understand it, and then we come into chapter 12 and carry on with the book. And what 9, 10 and 11 done, Paul addresses, after explaining the gospel, it's a level playing field in the sense that it has to be by faith. He starts Romans 1 with verses 16 and 17, which really opens up the whole book by saying that he's not ashamed of the gospel because it is the power of God for the salvation of everyone who believes. So he says it's by faith, first to the Jew, then to the Gentile. For in the gospel, a righteousness from God is revealed, a righteousness that is by faith from first to last, just as it is written, the righteous will live by faith. So he sets the scene, explains that in the first 8 chapters. Then when you come into 9, 10 and 11, what he then addresses is why God has not finished with the Jewish people. And he puts it in the context of the first 8 chapters. And he basically says, so yes, okay, they rejected the gospel, but does that mean God has rejected them? And he says, by no means, because the gospel is not based on your performance, it's based on faith. And he explains that the gospel first came to them and the promises of God are for them, and how we then as Gentile believers are grafted into the promises of God when we believe and come into a place of faith in God. Then, after explaining that and showing that God has not finished with the Jews, and therefore as Roman Gentile believers, you can't reject them either because God hasn't, he then, at the beginning of chapter 12, the first couple of verses, then says something really important. Therefore, I urge you, brothers, in view of God's mercy, because it's all God's mercy that we're saved, whether Jew or Gentile, to offer your bodies as living sacrifices, holy and pleasing to God. This is your spiritual act of worship. So what he's saying here, it's not your Roman culture that's going to do it. It's not the Jewish law that's going to do it. As you offer yourselves as living sacrifices, holy and pleasing to God, this is your spiritual act of worship. Then he says, do not conform any longer to the pattern of this world. So he's saying, Romans, Gentiles, don't conform to the pattern of your culture any longer, your mindsets any longer, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. So be transformed by what I've been teaching you in these first 11 chapters. He said, be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Understand what God is doing, how God is working, and how he sees both Jew and Gentile. And then he says, then you'll be able to test and approve what God's will is, his good, pleasing and perfect will. So he primarily he writes Romans not for a Western church, but he bursts a bubble of wrong thinking in the Roman believers that are Gentiles, saying that God's finished with the Jews now because now we're it as Romans. And this book is so important also in the context of some people's thinking of replacement theology, and this book burst that bubble. So it's important as church leaders we teach every chapter of the book of Romans and not just the first 8 and miss a few and then the last 2 or 3. So I think that's why the book of Romans is so, it shows God's heart and God's purpose really clearly to us.
Oh man, just brilliant. Clive Urquhart taking us to church right there. Hey, hope you guys enjoyed that quick conversation. We're going to be moving on to talking about the Israel of God that it talks about in Galatians 6 in the next episode. So if you're interested, then click the link to watch that one as well.